evening. I am Dr. Danielle Jones. I am an online science educator and OBGYN physician, and I'm so excited to be your period piece moderator for the evening. You may know me online as MamaDoctorJones, and you can find me on all the socials under that name. I'm thrilled to introduce you to our panel, Dana Marlowe, Executive Director and founder of Period Pieces charity for the evening, I Support the Girls, and Josie Kearns, gender consultant and dramaturg. You can find both of their social handles and websites in the chat box. Thank you for being here, ladies. We're so excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Dana, I read that you first learned about the need for bras in the homeless population when you were getting fitted for a bra yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story and how it led to the creation of I Support the Girls?
Sure, it was purely by accident. I most definitely didn't mean to start a nonprofit or a global NGO at that matter. But sometimes our life's journeys take us on these really wild and wacky turns, and mine just happened to happen with a stranger in a dressing room while getting fitted for a bra. Over the course of a prior year, I had lost 35 pounds, and with that weight loss also came changes in my body shape, and I needed new bras. And my husband one morning said, "You can't go to work looking like that. You need to get fitted." So I went to the local store, and as I was getting fitted, I asked the lovely associate, what could I do with my perfectly good old bras? And she told me 4 words, and that's led me on this incredible journey. And she said, "Homeless women need bras." Those were her words to me. And I hadn't thought about that. And when I went home, I started calling around to a local organization that might be in need. And I'm somebody who donates other items, clothing, my wedding dress, furniture, books, but I had never thought about opening that top drawer where I keep my bras and taking them out and putting them in with my other items that I donate. So it was kind of like one of those like aha light bulb moments. And I called a local homeless shelter in DC and said, I learned about this need. Is this true? And do you want my perfectly good used bras? And he said to me, "Yes, please. How soon can you bring them here?" I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't know what I don't know. So what else do you need?" And he said, "Well, if you're willing, since bras relate to dignity so much, would you be so kind to bring us a couple packages of maxi pads and tampons? Because it's not a line item on our budget or many other social service agencies' budgets for that matter. They're not covered by WIC or food stamps or SNAP programs. And they're expensive. And a lot of menstruators need them every single month for 5 days, 6 days, 7 days. So would you be willing if you're able?" And I said, "Absolutely." I put it out on my social media. It exploded. And within several weeks, we donated over 8,000 products. And this was summer of 2015. And there's an old saying that says, "You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither can you desist from it." And when this kind of exploded organically and the media started sharing about it, I realized that this was a much bigger need for a lot of people and that it was also a supply and demand issue. So a few months later, I Support the Girls, the nonprofit, was born, and here we are today.
Wow, that is a really amazing story. I feel like we've all had kind of those experiences of being fitted for a bra. If only we could all turn that into such an amazing effort as you've done. So you talked a little bit in that discussion about something called period poverty, which I don't know if that's a word or a phrase that everybody really knows a lot about. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is and kind of what the key issues for that is in the United States and even around the world?
Certainly. So period poverty is a global issue affecting menstruators who do not have access to safe and hygienic menstrual hygiene products. There's also cultural shame and stigma that's rolled up into period poverty. And as you mentioned, it's not just an issue here in the US, but as it's a global sanitation issue, also connected with clean water access. So because there are more than 800 million people that menstruate daily, not everyone is able to safely and hygienically manage their periods. And that's what period poverty is. And this can be due to lack of access to products or due to stigma. And it's a really huge problem.
Absolutely. So my next question is really a 2-part question for both of you. And I'm going to start with Josie, but I want to hear a little bit about what you think, just as someone who has experience in the community, understands as in terms of need, the trans and non-binary communities, how they're affected by both a disproportionate rate of houselessness and then additionally an added stigma of seeking access to menstrual products and menstrual care options.
Yeah, thank you. And as you said, there are really two things working against trans and non-binary folks who are menstruating. The first is just access, because houselessness is so much more prevalent among the trans community than the general population. For a variety of reasons. It's harder for trans folks to find and keep work. It's hard. A lot of trans folks get kicked out of the house when they're children, that sort of thing. So the rates are really disproportionate. So there's more need in that way. But also, as Dana was talking about, the stigma of menstruation, which exists around the world, is only exacerbated if you're a guy or a non-binary person who is menstruating and who people don't expect that from. In order to ask for those sorts of products, you're having to out yourself and reveal the fact that you're trans, which might not be the safest thing to do. So there are just a lot of barriers in place for trans and non-binary folks, even on top of the formidable barriers that already exist for menstruating women.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's something that it's easy for the general population to forget and not really think about, because it's not something that affects them. So can you tell us a little bit, Dana, about how I Support the Girls, in addition to supporting women and girls, is working to support the trans and non-binary communities as well?
Absolutely. So our focus is on menstrual equity, and that does not discriminate by gender. Menstrual equity impacts so many people, including lots of trans and non-binary folks. And so one of the ways that we like to support as many people as we can, and as many trans and non-binary menstruating individuals as we can, is to donate to incredible organizations from coast to coast in the US. So Rainbow Alley in Denver, and Casa Ruby in DC, and Rainbow Richmond in Indiana, and Out Youth in Austin. And there's organizations I could go on from Pennsylvania to Ohio that primarily focus on trans and non-binary individuals, or perhaps trans youth and teens. And we like to be able to provide them with whatever menstrual hygiene products their clients prefer. And so we donate by the tens of thousands of period boxers, period underwear, binders, bras, all the sorts of menstrual hygiene products, depending on what individuals would prefer to use. But one of in addition to just providing large quantities of products to trans-focused organizations, we also receive individual requests from a non-binary individual in Washington, DC, who really wanted very specific products and some very specific binders. Happy to hook them up with their whole list. We get a lot of emails and DMs from trans men in rural communities across the US. And I can think of two very recently, one in West Virginia and one in Kentucky, where they both indicated they didn't feel safe going to any place in their communities to be able to procure the menstrual products that they needed. And that's not okay. We will ship products of your choice to you, to what you need, because they share stories, they call us and they'll say, like, I try to go out at midnight so that I'm, seen by fewer people just to buy the menstrual product that I want. And there are so many of these requests that we do our very best to answer every single one of them with whatever the person's preferred products are.
Yeah, I mean, that's both heartbreaking and then just so encouraging that that's a need that you've identified that you're working to solve. Josie, can you talk a little bit, because this is something that I, as an OBGYN working in what has traditionally been considered a very gendered field, have struggled with, but then also, as I did better with it, have seen just massive benefits to the education of trans and non-binary individuals. But can you speak a little bit to how getting into a more gender neutral language, discussing menstrual care, has improved the benefit to these communities, and why that's important for organizations maybe who haven't been introduced to this before?
Definitely. I think the language makes a bigger impact than a lot of people think. A lot of times it's like, oh, it's just words. But what happens when we shift our language, especially around something like menstruation that has so traditionally been women focused and women centric, just shifting language to say people who menstruate, right? Or people who need period products. for folks who haven't considered the fact that not everybody who needs those products is a woman, even just hearing that phrase is enough to sort of trigger like, huh, what are they talking about? And a curiosity and an awareness, I think, of the fact that, oh, there are people who need this beyond what I thought of. And, regardless of whether they are familiar with the trans community or with details of what that might mean, it doesn't really matter, because the spreading that word, the more people can hear that everywhere, and the more we use that language, calling them menstrual products instead of feminine products, the more we can help lessen that stigma for folks who might be non-binary or trans men who need access to them, both in a setting like a community care setting, but also just in going to the store, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I was very nervous because I thought, how will this be accepted? And I do a lot of online education. And I will just add in here that it has been both very easy and very helpful to my audience in bringing awareness to the trans and non-binary communities and to improving that education access. Shifting the gear a little bit here, you talked about going to the store, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, which makes that a little bit more challenging. So Dana, can you speak a little bit to how the pandemic has affected I Support the Girls and how you had to shift within the organization to handle that?
Absolutely. So we have 5 core programs at I Support the Girls. One of our programs is our disaster relief initiative, and that stands true for both natural and economic disasters, where we're able to step in and help out. And in March 2020, all of my 2020 like big picture organization visions went away, and we had to pivot like that, because I didn't have global pandemic on my 2020 projections on bingo card. And what we saw in our inbox between just March 6th and March 13th last year, it was unparalleled at that point. And after doing this for 5 years, we kind of see some certain like ebbs and flows based on disasters. When people were hoarding toilet paper, and we all saw tons of media stories on empty shelves of toilet paper, they were also hoarding menstrual hygiene products. And that's really interesting to note, because we didn't consider that. And there were a lot of shelters that had to shut down because of the pandemic for one reason or another, thereby limiting access for many individuals who need to gain access to these products, among other products that they're trying to receive. And our inboxes were overflowing with heartbreaking stories of a mom, who may have lost their job due to the pandemic, and so serious economic job loss, economic impact, and with 2 menstruators in her house, and how is she going to literally get through the next period for all 3 of them? And we saw a 35% increase in these kinds of requests in a very short order, and that has continued to today, 1 year later. We are at that same statistic. It's mind-blowing. The need is so great, and we said we had to do something. So we pivoted, like many organizations. We dropped everything else we were working on for 2020, and we focused on the global pandemic to the best way that we could. We saw spikes in domestic violence requests, intimate partner violence requests were so massive. We had to create a program to respond to those requests because of the global pandemic. All of our volunteer events obviously were shut down, which put more of a strain on our team. And we did what we could. We started shipping out more products. We started reaching out to folks who might need products, and we donated to frontline workers, not just pop-up food places, but we provided PPE and menstrual products to those in need. And the need continues till today.
I love that. I think that that's such a great example of what you can do at an organizational level. If people want to get more involved or make a difference at an individual level, what would you suggest to them from that aspect?
It's not just donating product. I would pivot and say, to Josie's point, it's talking about menstruation, discussing language used to everyone has got to be the easiest, no cost way to get involved in kind of this menstrual movement. Because I totally agree, like language matters, and watching it change over time, and even in 5 years, has been this remarkable eye-opening study for me. And I think that it takes a while. So whether it's my 12-year-old son who's talking out in health class, answering all of the questions on menstruation, and all of his 20 peers this year realizing how normal it is for my son, who will never menstruate, to answer these questions about period and pads and tampons and normalize it, right? So it's that kind of normalizing to break down that stigma that I think a lot of people can hopefully do, assuming you live, again, if you're in a safe enough space to do so.
Yeah, I love that. And as a mom of 4 kids, that's my kids too, just talking openly about these things. And I think that's step one, is just normalizing these discussions and talking about the need in our community so that we can start to address that on an open and very clear level. So Josie, I'm going to end kind of with a question to you, which is, where would you recommend trans and non-binary folks go if they need support around menstrual care? What can they do, or where should they seek that help out?
That's such a good question, Dr. Jones, and I appreciate you asking it. And the hard thing about that answer is it's a little bit different for everyone. But I would say the place to start is just with community LGBTQ focused organizations. I live in Chicago, and here it's Howard Brown and Center on Halsted, places like that. Even if they don't have a program to help provide menstrual products or binders or bras, they'll often know of organizations that do. That said, there are plenty of trans and non-binary folks who live in areas that don't have any organizations like that. And I think, as Dana said, reaching out to an organization like I Support the Girls, another great place to look. I mean, obviously, honestly, this sounds sort of silly, but it's just asking other folks in your area on Reddit for suggestions. There are a lot of really great trans-focused message boards there where folks share that kind of information too. So that's where I'd start, but yeah, it depends a little bit on the individual.
Thank you. That is so helpful. You both have been such a great panel. Dana, thank you for introducing us to I Support the Girls, and Josie for your continued work in the LGBTQ plus community. I am so excited to have gotten to talk to you today, and I hope that our audience learned something great from you as well.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.